All right, it's noon, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and welcome to the first installment of Eat, Drink, Vote. My name is Molly Gleason, and I am the Communications Director at Illinois Stewardship Alliance, and I will be your host today. And I'm excited because this is the first of 9 weekly web discussions happening each Tuesday at noon from now until Election Day on November 3rd. So before we get started, I just want to provide a little background about this series and why we're all here today. As many of you know, we are an alliance of farmers and eaters who use our voices and our choices to build a more just and regenerative food system. And voting is one of the most important ways we can use our voice and our choice. So to help you all cast an informed choice on Election Day, each week on Tuesday at noon, we'll meet with farmers like we have here and partners to cover one of the issues from the Illinois Food and Farm Candidate Questionnaire. So earlier this year, the Alliance worked with local and national partners to create an Illinois Food and Farm Candidate Questionnaire featuring 9 of the most pressing issues facing farmers and eaters across Illinois. And we sent that candidate questionnaire to every congressional candidate running for the House and Senate in Illinois. And we asked how they would respond to these issues, covering everything from food security and corporate control to climate change and racial equity. So far, 9 candidates have responded. A big thank you to all those candidates, and you can find out who has responded so far at www.ilstewards.org/IWantAnswers. And we'll cover some of those responses in a bit, but just so you know, we will be publishing every response in the form of an Illinois Food and Farm Voter Guide later this month. So look for that coming out later this month. And if your candidates have not yet responded, you can urge them to do so by visiting, again, that same link, www.ilstewards.org/IWantAnswers, for everything you need to make reaching out to your candidates easy. So you deserve to know where your candidates stand on these issues, so hit them up via email or social media and urge them to make completing the candidate questionnaire a priority so that you can get their answers in that voter guide later this month. All right. I've done enough talking, so let's get started. We're going to talk about the 2 first questions in the candidate questionnaire, food security and the local food economy. This is an issue that is front and center at the Alliance's work, and I'm really excited to talk about it with a number of farmers here today. Many of the Alliance's members are diversified produce, livestock, and grain farmers that are selling locally, and as I said, we have some of these farmers here today. So let me introduce Traci Barkley of Sola Gratia Farm in Urbana, Jeff Hake of Funks Grove Heritage Fruits and Grains in McLean, Illinois. And also joining us is Wes King, who many of you may know as the former director of Illinois Stewardship Alliance and now the senior policy specialist for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition in DC. So he's our inside man there. Thank you all for being here today. And you can unmute yourselves now.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Great.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask the first question, which is I just want to know a little bit about your farms. Tell us, your name, your farm, and just a little bit about what you grow and where you sell it, and maybe how long you've been doing this. Anything that makes your farm unique.
I can go first. Hi, I'm Jeff Hake with Funks Grove Heritage Fruits and Grains. We have only been around since 2017. But I've been involved in farming for a lot longer than that. But the farm was founded just a few years ago by me, my wife, and her brother. They are the 6th generation of the Funks Grove pure maple syrup family, which has been making maple syrup in Central Illinois since the 1890s. As a fairly new farm, we're still growing, but we're growing very rapidly. We grow fruits and grains, as our name implies. And our main products at this time are our baking mixes, so pancake mix, muffin mix, that kind of thing, and our fruit leathers. It's basically taking the fruit that we grow on our farm or grows in our area and then turning it into a sort of like a snack or a candy, but it's all, organically grown fruits and just sweetened with maple syrup. We sell pretty much all wholesale to retail, so we'll sell to either the syrup shop or to a grocery like Greentown Grocery in Bloomington, and then they resell our products off the shelf. It's all value-added shelf-stable products. So that's us.
Thanks, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Traci.
Hi, my name is Traci Barkley. I'm the director of Sola Gratia Farm. So we're kind of an unusual farm in that we were started by a church, St. Matthew Lutheran Church, back in 2012. to help address food insecurity in our community. So in Champaign County, where we're located, in East Central Illinois, we have a food insecurity rate of just shy of 16%, which is higher than Cook County, which is where Chicago is located, which seems absurd considering we're surrounded by some of the best soil in the world. But we grow vegetables, organically produced vegetables, 50 different kinds, 150 different varieties, and we donate about a third of everything we grow into the community through Eastern Illinois Food Bank, food pantries, and a number of unique partnerships with public health, local Carl Hospital, a couple other partners. We also, our model is set up so that we have a 200-member CSA, and that runs for 24 weeks. We sell at 2 farmers markets. We have wholesale clients like our local food co-op and a number of restaurants and caterers. And yeah, that's us. We're an urban farm started by a church.
That's great. Thank you, Traci. And Wes, do you want to tell us a little bit about NSAC?
Yeah. So NSAC is the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. We are a nationwide coalition based in Washington, D.C., made up of approximately 130, 140 member organizations like Illinois Stewardship Alliance, as well as some larger national organizations, as well as some organizations that are quite small. And the thing that really unifies all of us together as a coalition has been our desire to try to bring the power and voice of farmers and eaters to Washington, D.C. to influence federal food and farm policy.
Thanks so much, Wes. We're really happy to have you there in DC. Okay, so we're going to jump into our first issue. So we're talking today about food security and strengthening the local food economy. And as I mentioned, it's the first issue in our Congressional Candidate Questionnaire. So if you're following along at home or at the office, again, you can download that Candidate Questionnaire at ilstewards.org/I-want-answers. So many folks, the Alliance included, have been talking about the benefits of local and regional food systems for years, but it's not really the dominant model here in Illinois. In Illinois, we largely grow corn and soybeans for export and more of a commodity model. So most people think of Illinois as just growing corn and soybeans. And I just want to, before we even talk about local food systems or strengthening the local food economy, I just want to know from all your perspective, what does a local food system mean to you? How might that be different than what we normally think of as agriculture in Illinois?
So when I think of a local food system, I think of as few links in the production consumer chain as possible. I think about keeping economic, environmental, and social sustainability in balance. I think about seasonality, diversity of products, freshness, and really, person-to-person relationships.
When I imagine a local food system, I just imagine one in which locally produced food is just common. It's normal. It's just a part of the everyday. Most people participate in the local food system in the way I imagine it, whether they are growing just a few things in their backyard or more people than 2% of all Americans are farmers. A lot more people are growers. A lot more people participate in the processing of food and in getting food to people. All the parts of the food system are accessible to all people. So that means that access to land, access to capital, to equipment, and to just the same quality of food should be available to all people. It should be the norm.
That's a great answer, Jeff. And I'm just going to jump in because I see that Jody Osmund has joined us. Thank you, Jody. Jody is our third farmer on our panel. Jody runs Cedar Valley Sustainable Farm in Ottawa. And Jody, do you just want to give us a brief introduction of who you are? Oh, you're on mute, Jody.
Can you hear me now?
There you are.
I'm a sustainable farmer and at Cedar Valley Sustainable Farm, and when you deal with things like rain and feed stores and things like that. Sometimes there's glitches. I had an appointment to pick up feed at 8 this morning, and I got there and they were expecting me at 9. So I've been trudging around in the rain, racing to get chores done, and then struggling with a different computer with my Zoom call. So we persevere.
We're happy you made it. Thanks, Jody.
And, you know, as far as being a sustainable farmer, you know, you just roll with things, and you deal with supportive people who are very forgiving and understanding.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Jody. And hopefully, I mean, it's a good thing you're getting the rain. I'm not sure all the farmers here are getting that same rain. But Jody, just to catch you up to speed, we're just answering the first question, which is what does a local food system mean to you? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I do, many. One of the things, the local food system is my livelihood. So it means all of the things that includes, raising a family, putting kids into and through college, paying a mortgage on a house, and also feeding my community. Yeah, that's, in a nutshell, it means everything to me. And it means a lot to the people who I have relationships, whether it's at my processor, which are small family-owned businesses, the local co-op that mills my feed, or the 230 families that I feed every month with our community-supported agriculture program.
Wes, did you have any further thoughts?
Yeah. So one just like sort of a overarching comment that I find interesting, having done this work for a long time, to recognize nobody talked about geography or distance as local, which I think is kind of fascinating and interesting, because I think it's somewhat been of a trapping of local food systems. And what I heard talked about instead was about local ownership, local power. That to me is what local food systems mean. It means farms that are owned by people who live in that location, processing that is owned by people who live in that location, and consumption in that location, rather than producing commodities to be sold to some faceless multinational corporation to be processed, commingled, and sent somewhere else around the world or around the country. Local is about local control and local ownership.
Oh, that's great. So that's a perfect segue into my nice little background information on this issue. So in the Food and Farm Candidate Questionnaire, we state that Illinois is one of the leading states in agricultural production, yet over 90% of the food purchased in Illinois comes from out of state or out of country. So here we are in one of the most fertile and agriculturally rich regions of the world, and we are not growing our own food. And in the best of times, this is a problem because it means that money is flowing out of our state and not being reinvested in our local economies, as many of the farmers have already mentioned. And in the worst of times, say during a pandemic, it means that if something happened to our supply chains, Illinois could not feed Illinois. So I'm just going to stop right there, because that's, I think, a pretty astounding fact. And Wes, I want to turn to you, because I've heard you say so many times that the food system we have is not the result of the free market. So can you talk just a little bit more about how we got to where we are right now?
Yeah. So yeah, when I've said that before in the past, and I would say it now, it is really just recognizing that there is a whole multiple layers of laws and regulations that have structured the marketplace so to be favorable to certain types of production, certain commodities of production, versus, just letting the community as a whole figure out, or farmers and eaters figure out what those markets look like. But with that said, yeah, it really comes down to the fact that we, for over 100 years, or about 100 years now, have been developing laws, policies, programs, and regulations that prioritize investment and security for a certain type of food system that is really about export. It's not about the freedom for farmers to produce what they want to produce, or freedom for communities to produce what they want to produce and eat. It's really been about laws that prioritize shelf-stable commodities like corn and soybean and wheat, because those things can be easily processed and shipped around the world.
I think following on to what Wes is saying is that it actively works against local farms feeding local people.
Right, exactly. And so it's not, and I want to be clear that, it's not necessarily that we need to support one over the other. We just need to let farmers be able to choose which one that, is best for them, and communities be able to choose a system that's best for them. And policies aren't necessarily set up to allow that right now.
Right. We've got a whole system of investments in research, a whole system of crop insurance, whole system of commodity payments, all of which have been focused for decades on a certain small sector of what people can grow and produce and what people eat. And as a result, we have a very lopsided market in which, we're awash in corn and soybeans as a country. We overproduce corn and soybeans as a country, not because there's a free market for it, but because we've made decisions for decades to have policies that support that certain type of agriculture.
Right. Okay. I want to keep us moving along here. So that was a really great a little background. So thank you, Wes and Jody. But I want to get to the issues that are on the ground right now. So farmers, it's been an unexpected year. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the issues that you're facing, your farmers facing, and maybe that your customers are facing?
Well, I can start. You mentioned earlier, Molly, during a pandemic, the food system as it's set up right now has resulted in disrupted supply chains. And we certainly saw that. And we normally have 150 member CSA. We maybe sell out in like April, May with some, extra marketing pushing. And we were sold out in March and had a waiting list of, an extra 50 people. We added 50 spots, had another 50 spots, probably could have doubled our CSA because so many people were starting to realize that our food system isn't as strong as we thought it was. That pandemic, climate change, short-term weather changes, we're seeing a lot of influences right now, and it's causing people to realize that, in a lot of ways, it's awakening people to why local food matters and why, why you need to know your farmers and support them. So for us, that's it. That was a positive issue, is seeing that more people were signing up for our CSA. We were in touch with more folks in our community and able to talk to them about what local food means. But on the other hand, we've also had some really unique weather events that have made this a very difficult growing year for us. We started with a late frost last year, a week before Halloween, which was really unusual for us. So we ended up getting a lot out of the field last fall, earlier than we expected. We had a late frost in May 15th, which is, it's kind of in the grand scheme of things, it's always possible, but we've for the last, I don't know how many years, had 80 degrees in April, pretty reliably. So, farmers have been moving up their growing season, and we ended up having a pretty hard freeze in mid-May, followed with flash floods in June, followed with an extreme hail event in July, which damaged about 70% of our crops in a short-term sort of way. And it's been a hard year. And so one of the issues that we're starting to think about is, our insurance plan as a diversified vegetable operation is been to plant multiple successions, to plant, more than we need, to plant 50 different vegetables. And, if we have to till in a bed that's damaged or has, pest damage or disease or something, we can plant again. We can move, we can shift things around. We have short seasons for our vegetables, but this year, considering how many different things have happened to us, it's had us kind of broadening the conversation about what other types of insurances we need to be looking at. Knowing, one, we're an urban farm and stormwater really matters for us. There's a lot of impervious surfaces around us. We know climate change is impacting the severity of storms and extended droughts and weather events. We also know, the pandemic has shown a lot of vulnerabilities in the system that we want to be better prepared for next time in terms of just general protections, having staff ready to work. Yeah, there's been some interesting things. The other thing that I want to mention is that we didn't know, in March, normally we'd be getting ready for markets, and we didn't know until 2 weeks before the market seasons started whether we'd be able to be at a farmer's market, which is a big deal because that's, direct contact with a lot of people in our community. It's serving our community that doesn't, subscribe to the CSA program. It's just an important source of revenue for us. And at least at one of our markets, 30% of our sales are through SNAP. So especially for a farm like ours, it's really trying to serve those that are low income in our community. To not have a way to get food to them really was disheartening. SNAP right now is not allowed online. There wasn't a way for us to serve those folks. We don't have mailing addresses or aren't necessarily in touch with them through email or Facebook. They come to market. They have their link being matched by the market manager. They're able to get a great value and eat well. So that's something we'd like to see improve in the long run and show the vulnerability in our system.
Okay, so it sounds like you have two big issues that you're talking about here. One is crop insurance, and the other one is not being able to have your farm cannot access SNAP customers. So that's bad for your customers who want your food, but it's also bad for you when you rely on or need more additional revenue. So I just want to get back to the crop insurance one real quick, because I think that one of the things that folks don't always realize, or maybe the broader public doesn't realize, is that the crop insurance system that we have right now is really set up to support commodity farms. It's set up to support farms that have one or two crops, but not necessarily a farm like yours that has 40, 50, maybe 60 different varieties of crops. And so commodity farmers are getting subsidized federal crop insurance, but that is not available, broadly not available to or workable for small farms like yours. So one of the things that Sherry Bustos said in the candidate questionnaire, Sherry Bustos of the 17th district, she said that she has long supported strengthening crop insurance programs by including whole farm crop insurance and better supporting small and medium diverse operations. So she wants to see crop insurance better support those operations. How does that sound to everybody?
That sounds great. I want to add one thing that I think when people think of crop insurance, they think about a lost product, whether it's due to, let's say a hail event, and per product. And the reason we haven't signed up for it is because it doesn't really work for a farm like ours, and it's like pennies on the dollar for what we'd normally get at market through a CSA. But the other two things I feel like are important to recognize is, a loss of a market. Like, there are a lot of farms that really suffered from restaurants being closed, or the communities decided to close their markets. Like, those are foregone opportunities then to sell your product. And then the other part is there's a lot of inputs in farming, and whether it's treating your soil with mycorrhizal fungi, or just applying, a short-term fertilizer, or, that's also not considered by the crop insurance program for diversified organic operations like ours.
Thanks, Traci. Jeff and Jody, what are the biggest issues facing your farms right now?
One of the things I think the pandemic and all the issues with mega processors and that sort of thing, it showed how flexible and nimble local farms can be, and how important having a community of farmers is. In our experience, we've developed relationships with other farms, so we have a more elastic supply when for our CSA, so we have a little more growth, and that's one of our built-in insurances. If something goes wrong on our farm, we have other farms that we can work with. One of the farms we work with in the area of pork has a fairly large farm to restaurant business, And it felt really good when our CSA doubled, that we could take hogs that they didn't have customers for and pay them the same kind of premium they would be getting wholesale for them. So that was great. It also highlighted the fact that there's just not enough human scale processing. Our processors, even now, are still at incredible strain. We're finally delivering order and halves of beef that were ordered in April and May, simply because of the processing backlog. So that's a real issue. And this crisis has showed the fragility of the food system and fragility of a lot of things within our economy. And one of the things, big picture looking at, we're, next year, 2021, 2022, we may need a works progress sort of initiative building local food infrastructure, whether that's human scale processing, food hubs for fruits and vegetables, reestablishing kitchens in schools that are getting food locally so they're not in danger of the next crisis.
Jody, can you talk just a little bit more about what you mean by the livestock processing bottleneck? Have you been able to get into your processor? What has been the wait time? What is it normally?
As far as the processing, normally, like if we need to add a date for 3 or 4 pigs, it's not a problem. We can do that within 4 to 6 weeks. We've been seeing things pushed out 8 and 12. Luckily, for example, with our poultry processing, we book that over 6 months in advance. We book a lot of our pork and beef in advance. We had a big influx of demand, but everybody did locally. So the processors were taking processing orders that were simply overwhelming. And some processors, they're booked a year out, and it's likely that some of those appointments will drop off and things will level out. But right now they're working under real strain. I mean, it's good because people are throwing money at them for additional processing, and they're working. They're providing jobs and they're hiring people, but it's not enough. And we don't know if this new reality is going to be something that they will have enough to invest to expand.
Yeah. So I just want to pin on this for the folks at home. Why is it a problem for if you're not able to get into a processor to process your products, your chicken, your beef, your pork? Why is that a problem for your farm?
Well, it's a problem for my farm because it creates a problem for my customers. We do a monthly delivery of food, beef, pork, chicken, and eggs. And this summer, there's been multiple times when we've had to push a delivery out a week because we're waiting on product from the processor. 3 times for a delivery, we've had to leave our house to drive an hour and a half to our processor at 6 in the morning to get it home by 11 in the morning to get to a delivery the opposite direction into the Chicago to our customers, where it was absolutely a just-in-time inventory, and it worked out to be about a 14-hour day for us.
So your customers aren't happy. They're not getting their product on time. You're not bringing in revenue to your farm, and you've got added expenses of continuing to feed these animals until you can get a processing date.
Exactly. And it limits our growth. We could be marketing more, and increasing production. For pigs, it takes me about 9 months to, from conception to market. So I could be marketing for next spring right now for increased production, but I don't have that assurance that additional animals can be processed and delivered by me.
Okay, so this livestock processing bottleneck is a huge impediment to growing the local food economy.
Exactly. If I can't get it processed, I can't grow.
Perfect.
And whether it's, chickens, it's a 4-month ahead plan, as far as going to the brood, just ordering chicks ahead of time and all of that. Cattle, it's even longer, but if we, it's great, demand is up, but I can't fulfill all that demand because I can't, even if I can raise the animals, I can't get them finished.
Yeah.
The packages for my customers.
Yeah, that's definitely a serious problem. I want to turn to Jeff now too and give him a time to answer this question. So we heard from Traci, she was talking about crop insurance and not being able to accept SNAP. Jody has mentioned the livestock processing bottleneck. Jeff, what is happening on your farm? What are your issues?
Just to back up first, what both Traci and Jody said, as far as crop insurance goes, I mean, we have a different set of crops than Traci's farm does, but it's the same problem. The insurance instruments are just not built for a farm like ours, and we just happen to have not gotten hit by multiple terrible weather events like Sola Gratia did this year. But we very easily could have, and we could have lost all of our grapevines, we could have lost our whole orchard, our whole wheat crop, which was great this year, but we kept watching clouds going by just before harvest, being like, oh no, this might be the one that knocks it all down before we can get it off the ground. A lot of luck, and luck is not good insurance. So I'll vouch for that one. I also really like Jody's idea of the Works Progress Administration for the modern era, growing local food systems infrastructure. I think that's a fantastic idea. I would love to see people sense my way to build something for us on our farm. That sounds fantastic to me. But that gets to my our main issue on our farm is that right now for our small scale grain production, we work with Andy Hazard up in Pecatonica, which is near Rockford, to mill our grain. That's 2.5 hours one way. And so we have to send all of our grain up there in parts, smaller pieces of our big harvest to have her mill it for us. And then we had to go back and get it or have it shipped back down. This has been working so far, but this is like a beginner strategy. And the idea is to grow out of that. With the resources we have on our farm, and especially because we have the benefits, the great privilege of being involved with the Funk family, we've been able to cobble together some of the other parts of what a grain operation needs. So we're making a dryer out of an old grain wagon. We managed to find an all crop for sale at an auction, all those other little pieces. But what we really need is a grain mill. And you can't really improvise a grain mill because there are food safety issues for that. There are just quality issues with that. You can't just the possibility of finding a grain mill sitting in a barn somewhere that actually works would be very remote chances. So we just need capital investment. We need, and so what happened with the pandemic, same as Traci had, demand just skyrocketed. So from one crop to the next, having a supply of grain, we thought that we'd maybe have a gap in July or August of a couple weeks. Instead, we had a gap of 3 months of not having any grain to sell people, because when the pandemic hit, people went on lockdown, everyone was like, I'm gonna learn how to bake, and I need flour, I need to get it here locally. And we suddenly, our sales doubled on all of our products. It was a weird thing to be stressed about when everyone else is stressed about other things. It was like, we're just too busy trying to pack product. But that meant it just went, and that we needed to be responsible for our own supply. And now we're in a position where we are ready and willing and able to build a mill on our farm, not just for us, but also for other grain farmers near us who can make use of that. but it's a big capital investment. We can do so many great things. We are growing so rapidly, and I feel very confident in our ability. We need money. we need investment. We need grants or loans or whatever to establish it on our farm. So, it's just this critical thing. It comes back to my feeling of it's just a totally wild concept to me that on this richest soil in one of the most productive agricultural counties in the United States, that there is no ability to mill grain for people to eat. So that's a fundamental concern of mine.
Yeah, that seems like a real issue. There's a real lack of infrastructure for local food processing, whether it be grains or whether it be meat. That seems to be a real issue across the board. Wes, what are you hearing from folks across the nation?
Oh man, this could have been a discussion about anywhere in the nation, because really, when it comes to it, all of these issues have been surfacing, particularly in the context of COVID, which it's hard to look before and beyond the pandemic right now. But access to SNAP, online SNAP, and the ability of farmers, small farmers, farmers markets, local retail to be able to accept SNAP online is something that's surfaced all across the country. It's not just in Illinois that it's an issue. Bottlenecks relative to meat production. That was an issue before the pandemic. Now it's become, as Jody highlighted, even more exacerbated by this kind of changing pattern in consumption of individuals doing more at home, being more concerned about the future of where they're going to get food for their families, and then also just the infrastructure on milling. I thought it was quite interesting how Jeff mentioned, like, it's not like there's this equipment laying around somewhere that you can dust off and buy and start up. Like, we're talking about expensive, highly specialized equipment, and really it does seem like we need to be figuring out as a country, how do we invest in building new supply chains, and hopefully the pandemic is creating more of an opportunity for that.
Yeah, I do want to mention, so a number of candidates in the Food and Farm Candidate Questionnaire did say that they would like to see online SNAP expanded so that farms and local farmers markets could be able to accept SNAP online as well. Just for the folks at home that might not know, right now it's only Walmart and Amazon can accept SNAP online, and so all of the federal SNAP dollars are going to those giant corporations instead of being able to be reinvested with local farms and farmers markets. And so candidates did say they want to see this expanded online. I just want to draw out a couple of responses here. First of all, Senator Durbin did introduce the Expanding SNAP Options Act that will help expand SNAP online so that more farms and farmers markets can accept it. And then Danny Brzezowski, who is running in the 16th district from LaSalle, said she used to manage a local farmers market and that she knows the challenge of navigating the bureaucracy of accepting SNAP online. And she'd like to see lower barriers that provide a critical safety net to families in need of nutritious food. So that was a really great answer. And then I also wanted to point out that Teresa Rayborn, who is running in the second district in the south of Chicago, mentioned that she was a former WIC and SNAP recipient herself, and she said we were allotted $15 for fresh produce for the month for our family of 5, and that was just not enough, not sufficient for a family of 5 to earn fresh produce. So having more access to farm fresh food would be great. So those are just some candidate questionnaire responses. Again, you can find out who's responded and urge your candidates to respond at www.ilstewards.org/I-want-answers. When your candidates respond, we'll create that voter guide so you can see how your candidates responded. Okay, I'm going to move us along. So we talked about all kinds of issues in the food system that are barriers to growing the local food economy, barriers to supporting local farms. Now I want to turn to solutions. So what are some solutions that you would like to hear your congressional candidates discuss? This is a pretty open-ended question. So feel free to, whatever you think would be something that you'd like to see your congressional candidate say or do.
I'll go. I would like for our congressional candidates to be discussing agricultural resiliency, because I think that there's a lot that could be done in terms of habitat protection, you know, protection of waterways, smart developments, and you know, there's a lot that can be done that can help. Well, I mean, the entire landscape, but there's a lot that can be done within farming to help farmers literally weather these storms a little better, and not have our food supply at risk, so much risk. I'd like to see them talking about farm to school and how we can support that statewide, because I feel like, I mean, right now, our farm did receive a grant from USDA to lead a 12-month planning process, to get a farm to school program in our community. But there's so much red tape. The schools aren't set up, you know, well. Food service workers are not trained to be working with local foods. The system is just not there, and especially with being a major agricultural state, same thing. I mean, it's crazy that we're importing so much of our food, and we could have these food hubs, you know, by school districts set up to be feeding our kids. And they could also, not only they're going to eat well, they're going to be supporting our local economy, but they're also going to see that this is a potential, you know, career path for them as well. I feel like there's such a disconnect between people and where their food comes from. And we know there's a lot more potential for more jobs to be created in local foods than there is, you know, in the mega monocrop farms that we have in corn and beans right now. And then expanding SNAP, and we talked about that, and then also crop insurance reform. It's a lot.
Great. Yeah.
It's a lot to do.
On the table. Jeff, Jody.
One of the things from a national level I'd like to see Congress people, senators focusing on is monopolies and monopsonies in agriculture. There's been some awareness being brought to the surface with Amazon and Facebook and Google and some of those corporations, Walmart, taking huge chunks of market share during the pandemic, getting wildly enriched, while millions of small businesses are failing. The same thing occurs because of JBS and Smithfield and Tyson and Bayer Monsanto and DuPont Hybrid International taking control, and you know, the ABC of grain buying, those things, even though all those deal with commodity farmers for the past 50 years, they've taken more and more and more of the commodity return. You know, it's that extraction, and monopolies and monopsonies are terrible for everybody, but especially everyday farmers. And I'd really like that focus.
Yeah, I think that's great. To your point earlier, I think 80% of the livestock processing industry is controlled by just 4 companies. And when those companies control the industry, they can undercut every small farm and every local food system. And so, yeah, it's a big problem for sure. Jeff, anything you'd like to hear your congressperson say?
Yes, and this is both to speak to, this is something that's not directly part of our farm, but some other work that I've been working on, and Molly, you were part of it at inception as well. We're working to try to establish a value-added fresh food hub in Mount Pulaski, which is kind of between Springfield and Bloomington. And a lot of our efforts are focused on trying to get fresh food processed and preserved in one way or another so that it can be available to school systems and other institutional buyers. But that also requires the cooperation of school systems, and oftentimes they are hamstrung by policy that is not up to them, that doesn't allow them to focus on any buying priorities other than the bottom dollar. So seeing a good food procurement policy for the whole state, and maybe even all the way to the Department of Education, that makes it easier for school systems to focus on priorities like quality of food and freshness. You'd think those would be important, but gosh, it's just how little can you spend on meals for students. And that goes to actually both of your points, because that then gives large food service providers a monopoly over some of the best contracts for food that one can get. But for our own farm, it's a lot of it is just about the ability to navigate the regulatory system that we're in. I want to be very clear, because no one would forgive me. We're not saying we need more regulations or more inspections or anything like that, at least not as far as the things that we're talking about. We just need to know how they work so we can be compliant. The regulatory apparatus is so opaque. We're trying to find out, what does it take to have a compliant on-farm grain mill, and it's essentially impossible to find information on that front. It seems like we have all these like simple, clear ideas that are just great ideas of like, we're gonna produce this food. Let's just go through that part of the process where we find out what are the rules we need to follow, and then we're stuck at that part. That shouldn't be the part that we're stuck at. We just need clear guidance. Just have it all written down somewhere where we can find it. I would really love to see someone talk about that, because we're really not asking for a handout in that situation. We're just asking for clarity so we can move on to creating something great on our farms. Also love to see more support for the value-added producer grants, more funding in that. I'd love to see something that supports the ability for more local grocery stores to be supported, which pairs with more or less support for things like a Dollar General or a Walmart to open in small towns. Really make sure that the tax base for towns can go more often to a local grocery store. People in small towns want those so badly. I keep seeing it happen where small towns are like, I really wish I could just walk down the street and get some groceries. And it's amazing how difficult that is. Once those stores go, as they have over the past 15, 20, 30 years, how difficult it is for them to come back. I would love to see our candidates talk about those kinds of issues.
Yeah, that's great. And we have a comment from a viewer here. She says, or he says, I'm not sure. It says, I think you need to sell schools and families on the quality of the produce. People throw out all of the mushy, gross apples. Look into food waste in the schools and spend more on good food and waste less. Laura, that was from the comment was from Laura. We could not agree with you more. So thank you for that comment. Yeah, Jody.
Just following on Jeff's comments, I speak with other farmers and processors and that sort of thing. And one of the things for small scale livestock processing is there isn't a lot of clarity. There isn't a lot of help from USDA to make these things happen. Actually, I think the attitude and culture at USDA is to discourage small scale processing. And one of the things I'd like my congressman to talk about is scale appropriate and risk appropriate regulation, and making it suitable to the scale. Jeff's gonna provide flour to a few thousand families, whereas a giant General Mills is millions and millions of families, and the amount of risk is much higher from a General Mills, which means they should have much more inspection and regulation. And unfortunately, especially in meat processing, they're self-regulating large processors, and small processors, they're just climbing all over them and making it very, very difficult, even though they're much less risky and generally cleaner, safer, and slower, because in meat processing, speed increases danger.
You're hitting the nail on the head, Jody. We talk about scale appropriate regulation all the time at the Alliance. So thank you for bringing that up. Wes, I want to hear from you. Are there policies on the actual legislation on the table to support some of these ideas?
Yeah, some of them. Yeah, definitely. A lot of what I would say, a lot of what the federal policy discussions have been of late has been COVID response. One of the things I want to go back and mention that, we talked about SNAP online, but there's also another issue, which is increased SNAP funds. SNAP is barely provides enough. Just, the comment from the candidate mentioning about the WIC $15 fresh produce per month, that made me think about the fact that the existing SNAP benefits already aren't enough. And that's been even further exposed during the pandemic. We're reeling economically. So that's one of the big things that people have been talking about in the COVID response, that we thought Congress was going to come together and pass something bipartisan about a month ago, and things kind of fell off due to partisan bickering. And one of the hopes was to see that increase, an increase, particularly if it was combined with online SNAP as well, would help everybody in the food system, local as well as traditional commodity production in grocery stores. But one of the pieces of legislation I wanted to mention, because it really hits at this infrastructure piece of things, is the Food Supply Protection Act, which was a bipartisan bill introduced by Debbie Stabenow and Lisa Murkowski. And the whole focus of this was looking at the vulnerabilities and fragility of our food system and food supply chains that COVID exposed, and investing in retooling of those, recognizing that for some operations who have been able to adapt to the new environment, there's costs involved. If you're trying to expand your CSA, or you're trying to reach new customers, there is costs involved in that. But also, if we're trying to create supply chains that are localized so they're not as vulnerable to, say, for instance, an outbreak at a massive meat packing plant, where are those resources going to come from? Food Supply Protection Act is also focused on that. Can we invest resources in retooling or creating new resilient supply chains? So that's one of the big things I've been kind of focused on during the COVID response work here in Washington, D.C. when it comes to Congress. And then the other thing I'll mention, which is sort of a brand new piece of legislation that was actually just introduced last week by Representative Alma Adams from North Carolina, piece of legislation. It's called the Local and Regional Farmer and Market Support Act. The real idea, or the nut of that, is everything the USDA has done since the COVID has really left local producers out. Small-time local and regional producers versus the big commodity producers, they've been left out. No assistance. And while it's great Jody has seen sales increase dramatically, it's great he's been able to help that one pork farmer who's lost all his restaurant contracts. But what about that pork producer or that vegetable grower who lost their restaurant sales, used to rely on universities that are now not spending as much because of they've got all these new costs related to safety under COVID, so they can't buy as much local food? What happens to all of them? A lot of them are staring down at their books, wondering if they're going to be able to produce next year and continue their businesses. So we've got 20% actually have increased sales. About 20% across the country of local food producers are probably facing bankruptcy if something doesn't happen to help them. Thus far, like I said, the USDA has not provided that help. And that's where this legislation that Alma Adams introduced, it would create a revenue payment, a payment program for farmers, local food producers, based on past revenue. A lot of what the USDA has done so far has said, like, well, if your price, if the prices went down for the product you make, you'll be able to get a check. Well, those prices are commodity prices. They're not direct market. They're not local food prices. They were, we found situations where farmers who had thousands of dollars of crops that suddenly they couldn't sell anymore, that they used to sell to universities, were going to get like a $75 check for $10,000 worth of that. It's not even worth filling out the paperwork. So that's where we've been trying to get, and hopefully if there is COVID response package pulled together in Congress in the next months, trying to get in there a new payment program to make sure that these farmers that are facing bankruptcy or have had to shell out a ton of new money in order to just keep doing what they're doing, get some sort of assistance. I would hate to find ourselves here next summer talking about, well, what are we going to do about, all these farmers that are now bankrupt, they're gone. Big multinational and large landowners are going to buy those farms up. We're going to see further consolidation and further monopoly.
So I'm going to just pull out those two bills that you said. So the Food Supply Protection Act, which is in the Senate, and the Local and Regional Farmers and Market Support Act, which is in the House right now. So when you download for folks at home, when you download the voter guide, look for your candidate to support either of those two pieces of policy. Yeah, those are great. And we do have a question in the comments from Cassidy. She says, could Illinois do something similar to Michigan's 10 cents program to increase local foods in schools? I mean, are there legislators that would support this? Cassidy, yes, we think that's a great idea. We would love to see more investment in farm to school programs on the federal level and on the state level. And again, you can look for your candidates to see if they support farm to school investment in that candidate questionnaire when it's available later this month. Yeah.
I didn't mention it earlier, but a piece of legislation that was introduced this year by a Representative Delgado in New York is seeking to try to pilot that exact concept. Looking at, so New York State's done this, a similar thing to Michigan's 10 cents per meal, looking to see if we can get federal resources to start doing this on a national level in a couple select states, because we think there's really, it's a great model, and there's a lot that we can show with a few examples that maybe this could become the new normal sometime in hopefully our lives.
That's great. Okay, we have two questions left, and we're getting to the hour here, so I want to try to wrap us up quickly on these last two questions. So for my next question here is, one of the rationales to continue supporting global supply chains, often at the expense of local and regional supply chains, is this idea that farmers are feeding the world, or that we must continue supporting global supply chains so that we can continue to feed the world's growing population. So I want to hear, what are your thoughts on this idea of feeding the world and this kind of pushback against local supply chains?
I'll take this one first. So I think the question deserves a question, and that is, does the rest of the world want us to feed them, or do they want to feed themselves? Are there people in all these communities across the world that are working to build their own local food systems? And do they have the agency to produce food for themselves? I think the answer to the question is they want to produce food for themselves. They don't need us to feed them. The other thing I would point out is the whole we're feeding the world is sort of an afterthought. It's a rationalization. It's not the reason why we grow all this. The reason we are growing all this is because there are people who are making money off of it. We've had a overproduction problem in global agriculture, let alone U.S. agriculture, for decades. The whole we're feeding the world is an excuse, is a rationalization of policies that have forced other countries to take our excess overproduction. Rather investing in creating localized food systems where we're doing things in balance with nature and we're not overproducing and we're making sure that people who produce the food get adequately compensated, we've created a system that's just like grow as much as you can and then we're going to shove it down. We're going to just push it out to the rest of the world and make the rest of the world buy it. We need to somehow flip that paradigm on its head.
Yeah, Jody, you got something to add?
To follow on Wes with the "we feed the world," it's kind of an imperialistic attitude pushing our products on, and it's in many, many, many cases, it's a violation of food sovereignty in the regions where we're selling our food. And it often undercuts the food infrastructure that is already there, that producers are making a living and value adding, and we're dumping what we think they should be eating on them. And it's not just internationally. Food sovereignty is an issue all across the United States as well. And we can't ignore the negative effects of denying people from something as basic as how they feed themselves.
Any final thoughts from the other farmers on this?
I was just going to say, I used to teach an undergrad class on food systems, and one of the things I would have my students do is just go to a grocery store and just stand there and marvel for a second at how incredible our food system as it exists is, how all those things can wind up in those neat rows. All the supplies are there, everything, anything you could possibly want. And then for the first time in my life this year, all of a sudden, you can see that all that's holding it together is like little bits of paper. It's just one little flick and the whole system falls apart. And then everyone comes to us asking for the food that we're growing. And so who is actually feeding the world? I think is really a question we could ask, because I'm not sure it's the story that's being told.
Great. You got Traci. Okay, I'm going to move us on to our final question of the hour. So, why is it important to be a food and farm voter?
Okay, I'll go ahead first. Well, I think, it really comes down to, that we're not going to give these kind of pieces of news, whether it's investment in meat or milling grain. None of that's going to happen unless we have members of Congress who are willing to prioritize those issues, or willing to, in the sweat equity around those issues. So really, that's why it matters. I also, want to be real quick, like around the farmers feeding the world. The problem isn't the farmers. It's the policies that they're locked into. It's the systems that they're locked into. I don't fault any corn or soybean farmer. They're stuck into a system. It's the system, not the farmers.
That's excellent clarity there. Thank you, Wes, for that. Jody.
I think the reason to be a food voter is it comes down to community, and the way we feed ourselves and we feed each other, it gives us the community that we have. And if we want an interdependent, reliable, resilient, redundant community that can weather storms and climate change and pandemics, we need to vote for and invest in a food system that strengthens communities, not makes them more fragile.
And a comment from Facebook Live right now. It says, because what could be more important than food? So yes, we agree with that too. Thank you for adding.
That's my sister, and I was going to say the same thing. Thanks, sis.
Yeah, Traci and Jeff, anything else to add to that? I think Traci, you had your You were going to say something?
Just add that I think, you know, health is really important for individual health, community health, environmental health, and it really boils down to food and putting in our bodies and how we're serving ourselves, our neighbors, our communities.
Traci, you got a little bit of a robot voice going on. I'm not sure whether you're hearing some echo. Oh, okay, it's raining there. Yeah, it's hard to come through. I'm so sorry to cut you off there. Okay, we are a little bit past the hour, so I'm gonna wrap us up here. Thank you all so much for being here, and for everyone who's following along during their lunch hour today. We hope you can join us next week, the same time, same place, to discuss the next generation of farmers and land access. In the meantime, don't forget to tell your congressional candidates that these issues matter by urging them to complete the Illinois Food and Farm Candidate Questionnaire as soon as possible. They have until September 15th, and then we're going to turn all of their answers into that Food and Farm Voter Guide for the public. So again, you can go to ilstewards.org/I-want-answers for your candidates' contact info, sample messages, and everything you need to make contacting them easy. And you deserve to know where they stand, so make sure you contact them. And thank you all so much for being here today and being part of the discussion. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.